Hello everyone, my name is Joseph and I have 1 year to create my dream video game. Now I know many of you may not know who I am, so let me introduce myself. I'm Joseph and I just absolutely hate having free time. So I decided to give myself 1 year from the date this video releases to create my ideal video game. Why? I don't know, why not? So going into it, I knew I was going to have to do a little bit of prep work before jumping into the gaping abyss of a time sink that I knew this project would be. So I contracted my wife to do art for the game, and I'll be working with her throughout the entire process. And I decided to start looking into some courses to just learn how to make a video game, because as of starting this, I have zero idea on how to make a video game. I have a pretty strong background in programming, but that's mostly for enterprise software. So unless I'm making a game where you build an online data management system, I'm a little out of luck. So I started looking into some courses and decided to take 2 before even touching a line of code. Those 2 courses were Bracky's 2D platformer course on YouTube and a course on Udemy by Gary Groves. They were structured fairly well, and I was hoping that it was enough to get me started. So after completing those, I jumped into making my very first game. So I should probably start off by telling you guys that I did decide to use Unity to build this game. I just don't have the free time or the knowledge to build my own game engine, so I wanted to start with something that would at least help me get started. So with that being said, let's get into the planning, and I do want you guys to know that I did spend a decent amount of time planning out the details for this game, and I have a whole game design document created for myself. But going through everything would probably be boring as shit, especially since there's a high likelihood that a lot of the specific details will change, so I'm just going to kind of give a TLDR of what I have planned for this game. I've kind of taken my favorite concepts from my favorite games and just forced these ideas together, and I expect it to go well, kind of like when you have all your favorite foods and just blend them together and it just tastes absolutely delicious. Anyway, at its core, this game is going to be a pretty standard 2D platformer roguelike dungeon crawler, but it's going to have a heavy focus on building a character in kind of like a D&D style. It'll definitely have heavily RNG dependent aspects of the game with this character build, but I want it to be a little bit more consistent and reliable. Personally, I love the character building aspect of RPGs, and I want that to be essential to the game and heavily based on player choice, and I'll get into the different systems as the series continues, but for now, I'll keep the explanation pretty simple. So the core gameplay loop is going to be, you pick a class and specialization, and your abilities and combat styles will be based off of that class. Your class will change your character for the run, so for example, if you pick the sword for your character, it comes with that class and becomes the object you control as the player throughout the run. Now you may be wondering why I want the main character to be the weapon. Well, it might be because the core story of the game is based around the time in my life where I felt like everyone around me just used me as a tool to get things done for them, and I'm actually projecting this through making the main character the tool you use to complete the dungeon. Or it's because I don't want to animate legs. I don't know, I guess we'll never know. Anyway, moving on. Your character will progress through a randomly generated floor full of pre-created rooms, similar to how The Binding of Isaac or Rogue Legacy works. Throughout the floor, you'll get drops that increase your character's stats, gain passive skills based on your specialization, and you'll get ability modifiers that will modify your class's base abilities, all while making your way to the floor's boss and eventually the boss of the entire dungeon. So overall, the core concept isn't anything revolutionary. Remember, I'm making my ideal game, not necessarily a game that will stand out in any way or sell well if I do end up deciding to finish it and sell it. This project is a way for me to learn a new skill, and making something that I know I'm personally going to enjoy playing is how I want to do that. So after brainstorming all of these concepts, putting them together in a way that I thought made sense, I moved on to actually starting developing the game, and I started with the most essential part of this game, character movement. So my plan for the development process of this game is going to be something that I call frequent prototyping. For this, I kind of have all the work that needs to be done organized in a way where I can quickly make different prototypes for each milestone. So for this first sprint, I wanted to focus on getting the rough movement system in place, and then I can build off that later. I'm not trying to perfectly refine every system when I come to it. I'm kind of just trying to make quick prototypes so I can test out how I feel about the game and make decisions based on that. So I started off movement by importing a character controller 2D script written by Prime31 that I'm planning on using for now. I may write my own in the future, but I'm not really ready to tackle the physics part of movement, and I kind of wanted to just get started. So movement started off pretty well. Created a placeholder sprite, some ground, press play, and it all worked perfectly. Yeah. After I finally understood how box colliders and rigid bodies interact, I was able to finally get my character standing on a platform. With that established, horizontal movement came fairly easy, but vertical movement presented a little bit of an issue. For some reason, the character would just float upwards for a frame before getting pushed back down to the ground, making it so that they were really only grounded every other frame. The way I had it built initially is that when they were grounded, it just wouldn't add any Y movement, so I thought it was an issue with the character controller's ground detection system. So I tried to write my own ground detection system, and that failed horribly. I went back to the drawing board and ended up coming up with a solution where I just always apply a downward gravity force to the character, even when they're grounded. So even if for some reason they're going up and they're adding a Y movement value, it just pushes them back down before the character actually moves. So when they're on the ground, they stay on the ground. And with that done, jumping just kind of worked. That was really the main areas that this ground detection issue was presenting itself, was when trying to jump. So jumping was finished, and from there it was a small jump to adding double jumping and then dashing. So with this, basic movement was now done. But before moving on to the next step of this prototype, I wanted to add some basic refinements and effects. So I started these refinements by adding a diagonal in-air dashing, and honestly, fuck everything about this. After starting on this, I quickly ran into a problem where if you dashed diagonally up, you kind of just continued going up and up and up, and you maintained a lot of that initial burst of speed momentum even when the dash finished and the speed went away. And I don't know what it is, but I kind of just go brain dead when it comes to Y directional movement. So getting this to function properly was honestly quite the hassle. And the solution I came up with probably isn't even going to be the be-all end-all solution, and I'll probably change it very soon. But what I ended up doing is saving the Y momentum value before the dash and just reapplying that when the dash was finished, just to avoid any potential issues. And there are some weird situations that have come up, and I don't know if this is caused directly by that, but for now it's working and it's good enough to move forward, and I can come back to this the next time I look at the movement functionality. So now with the character movement done, it was time to look into building the camera, and really I left this super basic. It just follows the character with a little bit of padding so it looks ahead slightly. I didn't want to go too in-depth with the camera right now because there are a lot of features I want to add in, and right now is just not the time to hyper focus on the camera itself. So I just made it follow the player, and then I added a bit of parallaxing for the future scenery that will be added. Next, I worked on giving the dash a little bit more of an impact. I really like the idea of having invulnerability frames when you're dashing, so I made some effects that kind of made the dash more prominent. The first effect I added was just a simple dash trail that will kind of follow the character during the dash and create a copy of them that will fade out quickly after, similar to Celeste and how that dashing works. It was actually pretty easy to implement. All I had to do was take the current sprites, put it on the screen, and then just fade it out with a simple animation and then destroy the object. I honestly thought that would be a much bigger project, but it ended up being super easy. In addition to that, I added a slight camera shake when the player dashes, also similar to Celeste, because I really like how those dashes feel. And neither of these effects are perfect. For example, the dash trail sometimes only creates 3 copies and sometimes creates 4, so it's a bit inconsistent in that area. And also the camera shake I'm not super happy with. But with this base functionality in place, I'm always able to come back to this later, which is why I like this development process that I've chosen of just kind of rapid prototyping. So before moving on, and as you've noticed, I've taken a lot of inspiration from Celeste in terms of the dash, I decided to add in the little puff of smoke that shows up when you jump. It wasn't too in-depth, and honestly what I have in there is really bad, but there's a small particle effect that just spawns when you jump or change directions too quickly. I like where it's at, and I like the effect, and I'm going to keep it, but I need to refine the style a little bit, and that'll come later down the road. But with that in place, I was planning on moving on to the next step of this prototype, but I got some of the rough draft designs for the character themselves. I wasn't planning on adding any styles until the end of the first milestone, which was going to be in quite a while, but for those of you who have suffered this far, I decided to add in a little sneak peek of what the style will be for this game, and this is the style for probably the base or initial class, the first basic sword that you'll get right at the beginning. It's still a rough draft design and it's not finalized, but it's better than looking at a box with a few arrows on it. With this sprite in place, I added some basic animation, a little slight floating idle animation, as well as a quicker up and down animation for when it's running, just to give it a little bit of character and just to get those initial ties in for when the animation will actually take place. So added that all in. I did have to adjust the trail slightly because what it was doing was copying the sprite, but none of the transform properties. So I just had to apply the rotation of the sprite since the sword is going to be on an angle and will change based on what animation it's doing. So I just copied the current rotation and position and applied that to the dash as well, and then everything just worked. Overall, everything looked a little better, and then I decided to finally move on to starting the player status system. So now that the movement was officially done for this revision or this milestone, I decided to move on to some of the player status logic, and this will be where the player's stats are manipulated and added, buffs, debuffs are handled, all of the stuff that is affecting the player. I actually want this to be the primary focus of the next devlog video, but for now, I wanted to introduce something basic just to give you a taste for what the next episode will be. So before I called it a day on my progress, I added a very simple system that allowed you to pick up power-ups and apply them to the character. The way that this is going to work in the end game is that you'll have stats that you can increase with these power-ups, and you'll get a choice of which stat you want to increase. But for now, you just get one, and it adds a number to the player status controller. I also added a timer that stops after you reach a certain amount of pickups because I actually want to start sending this game to a few of my friends just to get a feel for what they think of the movement itself. So I added in a little mini game that will allow them to test it out. I really want to make sure that the movement in this game feels fluid and comfortable, so getting early feedback on the feel of it is going to be super important. I'm not going to look at the specifics and refining it until later on, but having that feedback up front is going to be incredibly important and really help shape this game. When I do end up using this data, I will include a section in that video that kind of outlines how I go over feedback, because you can't realistically take every piece of feedback that everyone gives you. You have to filter through it and pick out the important parts, and that's something that I do want to focus on in a later video, but for now I just wanted to introduce the idea and the topic, and we'll touch on that later. But this is as far as I went with this player status management, and this is where I'm at right now. I'm going to pick up with this in the next devlog. I really want to make sure that this is planned out well, and I didn't want to include that planning in this video because there's already so much talk about conceptual concepts, I guess, that I'll save that for the next one. And with that, I finished everything that I wanted to get done for this sprint and for this video. I wasn't really sure what people wanted to see, and although this devlog is mostly just a journal for myself so I can kind of track my progress, since I am releasing them online, I do want to make sure they're relatively entertaining, so let me know if this format is something you like, and if you want more information, less information, just let me know what you think. That being said, if you're looking forward to the next video, the concepts we're going to go over and I'm hoping to build in are fleshing out and building out the basic player management system, implementing some more designs and some more animations if we get lucky and have enough time to get that in, and starting the enemy AI system. So if that's something you're interested in and you want to be notified when that video goes live, be sure to subscribe. And if you want to stay even more up to date, follow me on Twitter. I'm going to try to be fairly active, posting progress updates on designs or just concepts, so follow me on there if you're interested. With that all being said, that's all I got for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your week. I am Joseph, and I will see you next time.